At this time, I want to try and give you some assistance in reading the Rhetoric of the Image chapter by the French philosopher, linguist Roland Barthes. So, students in the past have found this reading a little challenging. There are some critics of Barthes who say this is just all nonsense. There are others who say he has made a genuine contribution to our understanding of the way language works, and particularly the way the way culture works. He's an interpreter of culture. So we've got entire books of his essays, etc. So the one that you had there, it's called The Rhetoric of the Image. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving you background, possibly only to the first third of of his essay. I'm working from a prepared text that I made here. I will post this in the Canvas site along with it, but I wanted to just point out some things. So he's a French philosopher. He's heavily influenced by structuralist linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure. So you remember from an early class meeting, we talked about Saussure, who has the sort of two-part understanding of language. We have the sign and we have the signified. So we have the word dog, and it has an utterly arbitrary relationship to the four-legged canine. But the word dog is meaningful because it is different from the word cog or bog or other similar words. Just like the dog is meaningful because it's different from wolf or coyote, etc. So that's the way Saussurean linguistics works, and that's sort of the essence of structuralism. And when you look at the reading about laws of the letter, that is a structuralist interpretation of typography. So Barthes begins by pointing out that linguists don't like the language of bees or the language of gesture because those kinds of communications do not work the same way that language does by a system of difference. So yes, people understand that bees communicate, birds communicate, gestures communicate, but it is not the same as language because language, according to linguists, works by this sort of arbitrary relationship of the difference of different signs. Yes, bees communicate, but to a linguist it is not language. So what about images? Can they be analyzed in the same way that language is analyzed? Barthes quickly posits two opposing camps. There are those who think that the image is an extremely rudimentary system in comparison with language, and I'd say a lot of university-educated people, a lot of professors, particularly professors in the humanities, are often going to be biased in favor of language and biased against images. But the other side says there are those who think that signification, the way the sign points to the signified in Saussurean linguistics, cannot exhaust the image's ineffable richness. So an image can include some signification or some messages that mere language just cannot do justice to. Barthes then writes, if image is in a certain manner the limit of meaning, then it could be used to understand how signification works. It could help us answer these questions. How does meaning get into the image? Where does it end? To get at answers to these questions, Barthes says he will be, quote, submitting the image to a spectral analysis of the messages it contains. To make the job easier, he will only study the advertising image. Why? Because we know beforehand what an advertiser is trying to signify. Advertising is unambiguously intentional. Okay? So when an artist paints a still life of a pasta dinner, he or she may intend any number of things. When a business that sells the ingredients of pasta dinner creates an ad for its products, it intends one thing. It wants you to think positively about pasta dinners and to associate that particular brand with good pasta dinners. He describes the advertising image as frank or at least emphatic. So, interpreting images can be challenging. Interpreting advertising images is less challenging because we know the intention. Barthes then points out that the first message the image yields is linguistic, that is, the caption of the image and the labels on the food products. So in the reading, it starts with a picture of the Panzani ad, but that picture does not have the actual captions of the ad. I have added in a subsequent page the Panzani ad with the captions, which basically says it's pasta, it's sauces, and things like that, and it's saying it in French because this ad for Italian food products occurred in France in a French magazine. The linguistic message is twofold, with both denotations, food products, and connotations, in this case, what Barthes calls Italionicity. He then points out 4 different signs that can be found in the image. The first is the idea of a return from the market with the attendant values of freshness and domestic preparation. So what you've got depicted is a bag, one of those sort of, reusable, recyclable grocery shopping bags, and it's got canned goods. It has plastic wrapped pasta, and it's got some fresh items. It's got tomato, it's got a pepper in there, okay? The second sign is the one produced by the confluence of tomato, pepper, and the colors green, yellow, and red, reminiscent of the Italian flag, green, white, and red, to connote Italionicity, all supported redundantly by the Italian-sounding brand name Panzani. He points out that while these aspects of the image connote Italionicity to a French audience, they would not have the same effect on Italian audiences. To explain this phenomenon, I like the notion that fish don't see water. Italians wouldn't see various markers of Italian culture as markers of culture. They would just see them as the world in which they lived. The third sign Barthes identifies as the notion of total culinary service, pointing out that the presence of produce, which is not a Panzani product, along with the packaged goods that Panzani sells, imparts 2 messages, including the idea that the cellophane-wrapped and canned items are as natural as the tomato, pepper, and garlic spilling from the bag. The fourth sign, the composition of the image, evokes the memory of innumerable alimentary paintings in the still life genre. So in the Canvas site, there is a link to pictures of food, but also what I'm going to, once I finish this recording, I will put in here some pictures of still lives of Italian food, including a original drawing by me. Okay, the fifth possible sign that Barthes points to is the information that the image is in an advertisement, something that is apparent from its placement in a magazine and the product labels. But he claims that this eludes signification insofar as the advertising nature of the image is essentially functional. So that one's a little harder to understand his point, but he's saying, the notion that the ad is telling you that it's an ad, we can kind of ignore. Just like right now I'm speaking and I'm communicating to you, but I'm not communicating the idea that I'm speaking. So that's getting a little complex there. He next goes on to point out that several of the signifieds in the image are iconic. So unlike the arbitrary connection between the signifier dog and the 4-legged canine, the relationship between a photo of a tomato and a real tomato is not arbitrary, but analogical. So there is no necessary connection between the word dog and that 4-legged canine, but there is a necessary one-to-one connection between a real tomato and the photographic representation of a tomato. So it is not arbitrary. It is what he calls analogical. So here is where the relationship between language and what Barthes calls a true sign system and the image breaks down, because unlike language, which is a system of signs with a code, images present a message without a code. Consequently, in order to read this level of the image, all that is needed is the knowledge bound up with perception. But Barthes reminds us that that knowledge is not nil. Here he is concurring with what we were introduced to in the first readings and videos regarding the fundamental paradox of vision, that is, the image at the eye has countless possible interpretations. The resolution to that paradox lies in the notion that children are born with innate rules by which they learn to construct visual worlds. This leads Barthes to conclude that the image presents us with 3 different messages. The linguistic message, which we resolve according to the code by which we understand language. and two iconic codes. The first one, in which a picture of a tomato represents a tomato. We resolve by those innate rules by which we construct visual worlds. And the final one is the iconic cultural message that allows us to understand the bag and its contents and its colors as connoting Italianicity. He raises the question of the legitimacy of separating those two iconic messages, given that they are united in the objects depicted in the message, but he justifies the separation based on the different ways we understand the depictions. The innate rules of image processing, that's what allows us to read a picture of a tomato as a tomato, versus the cultural knowledge about Italian food and the colors associated with the Italian flag. So therein, I've tried to unpack, that's just probably the first 3 pages of what is a 10-page article. I'm going to save this video and post it along with a couple of images in it. And then I will be posting this document from which I just read in the Canvas site as well. And then I will go on to later portions of the Barthes essay to try and explain some of the complex ideas there. So I hope this helps you understand it and helps you, even if you don't like him and the way he writes, sort of accept the fact that he is talking about some very significant ways in which images are different from other forms of communication. So I'll save this, post it, and be back in touch with you soon.